If you fix that, I'll quit." The mechanic laughed, but what the woman did next. There are stories you hear that feel like they exist to remind the world of something it stubbornly forgets. This is one of them. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that starts with the sun shining brighter than it should for someone who just spent a night without proper sleep. Heather had woken up at 5:30, no alarm, with that pang in her chest we all know well when you sense the day is going to be tough. The car had died the day before at the worst possible time, as bad things usually do, and she needed everything sorted out before noon. Her name would raise eyebrows at that garage. Not because it was an unusual name, but because a woman showing up alone in that place, wearing a pink dress, her hair loose, and a determined look in her eyes, was a sight the three mechanics working there weren't used to seeing, and they made that clear from the very first second. Heather was 38 years old, a trained mechanic, and the daughter of Mr. Walter, who for 23 years ran a garage that was a benchmark in the entire region where she grew up. She learned to work on an engine before she learned to bake a cake. But life has a twisted way of not letting things be simple, and this morning would prove that in a way she didn't expect. Her black car, a large, heavy sedan, was parked on the curb in front of Sullivan's Auto Care, which sat on a busy street in downtown. She had pushed the car there with the help of a young man passing by, because the engine simply showed no signs of life. Good battery, plenty of fuel, but nothing. The engine was as dead as a rock. Derek came out of the garage with that air of someone who's doing you a favor just by showing up. In his early 40s, black cap turned backward, dark shirt with oil stains that looked like they'd been planted there ages ago. He looked at the car, then at her, and gave that little smirk that said everything without needing a single word. "Good morning. What happened?" "Engine won't start. Last night it started sputtering and then suddenly just died." Derek called two co-workers over with a wave. Joey, the youngest of the three, about 30, freckled, with that attitude of finding everything funny, and Mr. Arthur, older, with a full beard and arms crossed, the kind of guy who's seen a lot in this life. The three stood there looking at the car with the hood still closed and then looking at her. "Ma'am, do you have any idea what it could be?" Joey asked, in a tone that was more teasing than curious. Heather noticed the tone. She always noticed. She'd spent years learning to recognize that mix of disregard and mockery some men used when they wanted to say, without saying, that she didn't know a thing about what was right in front of her. "I do," she replied calmly, "but I want to hear what you think first." The three exchanged glances. Derek opened the hood. A car engine, to someone who's never laid a hand on one, looks like a jumble of random parts. But for someone who grew up listening to Mr. Walter explain every part as if introducing a family member, that thing had logic, order, history. Heather stepped closer and leaned over the engine, her hair falling forward as her eyes scanned every detail with an attention the three men behind her didn't expect. Joey was the first to laugh, then Derek. Mr. Arthur just smiled. Quieter, but the mockery was there just the same. "Go ahead, engineer," Joey said under his breath, thinking she wouldn't hear. She heard, and she didn't respond. Her fingers went straight to a specific spot. She pulled out a wire, examined the connection, ran her thumb over a surface, and looked at the black grease left on her skin. Then she slowly raised her head, looked Derek in the eye, and said, "Crankshaft position sensor. The connection is oxidized, but the sensor itself is probably still good. If you have a contact cleaner kit and a multimeter here, we can confirm it in 10 minutes. Silence. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of someone who didn't expect that sentence to come, least of all that sentence. Derek crossed his arms. "Ma'am, are you a mechanic?" "I am. But I didn't come here to work. I came to bring the car in for repair." That's when Derek said the line that started everything that followed. "Oh, then you go ahead and fix it yourself. If it's just the sensor, I'll quit." Joey burst out laughing. Even Mr. Arthur let out a sigh with a smile tucked inside. It was a bet they thought they couldn't lose, because this wasn't just about the car. It was about their pride. It was about the small world they had built in that garage, where women showed up to pay the bill, not to give a diagnosis. I had to pause here for a second when I heard this part, Because there's a huge difference between someone who faces a situation like that with anger and someone who faces it with calm. And Heather's calm at that moment, it's the kind of thing that only comes from someone who has been through this many times and learned that the right answer isn't to yell. It's to do. Heather opened her purse and pulled out a small black leather case, worn at the edges, with the leather peeling in one corner. Mr. Walter's case. She had kept it after her father had to stop working, about 2 years earlier, when his hands no longer obeyed like they used to. Inside the case, a tiny set of tools, a can of electrical contact cleaner, and a card where it was written in her father's slightly crooked handwriting, "Never let haste control your hand." She didn't say anything else. She just asked to borrow the multimeter. Derek grabbed the device and handed it over with that look of someone handing over a trophy they know the other person can't carry. Heather worked in silence. She disassembled the connector, cleaned the terminals, tested the sensor's resistance with the multimeter, confirmed the diagnosis, reconnected everything, wiped away the excess moisture around it, and asked for the car key. Derek handed it over. She got in, turned the key. The engine started on the first try. No one said anything for a time that felt longer than it was. Joey was the first to open his mouth, but nothing came out. Mr. Arthur slowly uncrossed his arms. Derek just stared at the hood, as if the car had done something he couldn't explain. "So," said Heather, getting out of the car with the key in her hand, "how much do I owe for the visit?" Derek shook his head. "I'm not charging you anything." "I'm paying. My father always said that work has value, no matter where it comes from." She left a folded $20 bill on the hood, picked up the little leather case, put it in her purse, and turned to leave. That's when Mr. Arthur spoke, for the first time since she had arrived, with a voice different from what she expected, deeper, heavier. "Wait a second." She stopped. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Mr. Arthur wasn't just another mechanic at that garage. He was Derek's silent partner, the oldest of the three, and he had a way of speaking that carried weight. When he said something, people stopped to listen. "Are you Walter's daughter from the garage in the neighborhood?" Heather turned slowly. "I am." Mr. Arthur nodded, as if that closed some account he had been trying to close since she arrived. "I met your father at a parts fair about 20 years ago. Serious man, good mechanic. He was the best I ever knew." Pause. That kind of pause where everyone knows something was left hanging in the air unsaid. "I heard the garage closed," said Mr. Arthur. "Yep, it closed," Heather replied, her voice steady, but something shifted in her eyes right then. "When he got sick, I tried to keep it going, but I couldn't." What she didn't say at that moment, and what would only come out later, was the real reason she hadn't managed to keep her father's garage running. It wasn't just his illness. It was a longer story, more painful, and it had everything to do with why she was on that street, that Tuesday morning, with a broken-down car and a toolkit in her bag. She left. The three of them stood there, the car's engine still idling, making that soft sound of a well-tuned motor. Derek stayed quiet. But something changed in him right then, and people who knew him well would recognize it. He wasn't a bad man. He was a man used to not being challenged, and when someone did challenge him, he reacted the way he'd learned, with laughter first, then silence, and with that silence came sometimes shame. That afternoon, Joey asked him if he was really going to quit. Derek just looked at him and turned away, but the story was far from over. Heather hadn't gone home after the garage. She'd gone to the office of an accountant named Mr. Henderson, located in an old building downtown, on a floor where the elevator almost never worked. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, knocked on the door with 2 quick taps as usual, and walked in. Mr. Henderson was 63, with thick-rimmed glasses, completely white hair, and that demeanor of someone who'd spent a lifetime dealing with numbers, but had learned that the real numbers in people's lives are never just numbers. He'd been the accountant for Mr. Walter's garage for decades, and over time he'd become much more than that. "You made it," he said, looking up from his computer. The car died. But I handled it. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, letting out a long sigh. Tell me what you found, Mr. Henderson. I can't wait any longer. Mr. Henderson took off his glasses, cleaned the lenses with a small cloth he always kept in his pocket. That gesture, she knew, was his before delivering bad news. Heather, it's worse than I initially thought. She closed her eyes for a second. How much worse? There's a debt with the parts supplier that your father signed a payment plan for years ago, and that contract passed to you when the garage was transferred to your name. The current amount, with the accumulated interest, is high, and there's a deadline. How long? 90 days. Heather stared at him without blinking. 90 days to come up with an amount that she, working as a freelance mechanical consultant, couldn't earn in under 2 years. Her father's garage was the only asset she had, the property, the space, the tools that were left. And she had dreamed, ever since her father got sick, of one day reopening that place. Not because she needed to, but because that place was the most vivid memory she had of who she was. Is there a way out? She asked. There is, but it's not one you'll want to hear. Silence. Tell me. Sell the property. It's the only way to pay off everything at once and still have something left for you. That hurt in a way she couldn't hide. Mr. Henderson knew her well enough to notice. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just waited. I can't sell that place, Mr. Henderson. I know. My father built it with his own hands. Every brick in that wall has a story. I know, Heather. His workbench is still there. The photo of him with the local Little League team from '88. The little plaque my mother had made when he reached 10 years at the garage. Mr. Henderson put his glasses back on. There's another option, but it's going to require something I'm not sure you're willing to do. She waited. Partnership. Someone who can bring in capital to pay off the debt and reopen the space with you. You bring the property and the know-how. The partner brings the money. And where do I find this partner in 90 days? Mr. Henderson typed something into the computer, spun the monitor toward her. It was the name and address of an auto shop. Sullivan's Auto Care. Heather stared at that screen as if the computer had made some tasteless joke. You've got to be kidding me. Derek Sullivan has been interested in expanding his business for a long time. I know because he consulted with me last year about the feasibility of opening a second location. He has the capital, and the space you have is exactly the profile he's looking for. Suburban neighborhood, spacious garage, good access. Heather stood up from the chair. He just laughed in my face this morning. I know. He and the others looked at me like I was some decoration that showed up in the wrong place. I know, Heather, but business isn't friendship. Sometimes the best partnerships start in the most uncomfortable way. She stood up, looking out the office window. The street below was busy, people passing by, a hot dog vendor on the corner, a noisy bus that stopped and left. Life going on without knowing what was happening inside. There are moments in our lives when the only choice that seems right is also the hardest. And that's the kind of moment that reveals who a person really is. Not the easy moment. The moment where all you have is what you decide to do with the discomfort. Heather left without giving an answer. She needed time. 2 days passed. She went to her father's garage, which sat locked with a rusty padlock on a street in the neighborhood where she grew up. She opened the padlock with the key she had carried on her keychain forever, pushed open the iron gate that creaked just as it always had, and went inside. The smell was there. Oil, rubber, metal heated by the sun coming through the cracks in the tin roof. She stood in the middle of the empty space for a long time. The equipment had been removed when she could no longer afford the rent on the warehouse where the garage used to operate. This property, the one her father bought before she was born, was smaller, simpler, but it was her father's. She sat down in the old office chair in the corner, the only thing she hadn't taken out of there. The picture in the frame, the two of them. Her at about 10 years old in a blue jumpsuit, holding a wrench with both hands like it was a trophy. Mr. Walter beside her, smiling with that quiet fatherly pride of seeing a child learn. She looked at that photo for a good while. Then she picked up the phone, Derek answered on the third ring with that voice of someone who was in the middle of something and not expecting the call. "This is Heather, the woman from the black car." A short pause on the other end. "I know who you are. I need to talk to you about business. If you're interested, I'll explain everything in person. If you're not, no problem. I appreciate your time, and you don't even have to respond." Silence about 3 seconds. "You can come tomorrow morning." She went. She arrived at 8 sharp wearing pants and a t-shirt this time, her father's toolkit in her bag out of habit. Derek was alone in the garage. Joey and Mr. Arthur hadn't arrived yet. He was holding a cup of coffee and had a different demeanor from the day before, less showy, more quiet. She laid everything out on the table: the property history, the debt, the deadline, what she wanted to preserve, what she was willing to negotiate. She spoke without beating around the bush, without apologizing for anything, without trying to soften what was difficult. Derek listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. He picked up the cup, drank the rest of the coffee, and set it on the counter. "Why did you come to talk to me?" "Because you have the capital and I have the space, and because my accountant told me you're looking to expand." "There are other investors." "There are. But none of them will understand what that place means. You're a mechanic. You know what it's like to build something like this." Derek looked at her closely, that evaluative look of someone who wasn't finding anything funny anymore, someone genuinely thinking. "Do you want me to apologize for the other day?" "No. I want you to make a decision about the business based on the business. The rest is in the past." He shook his head slowly. "You're just like your father. Except I don't have the patience he had." Derek almost smiled. Almost. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit that like button, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. The negotiation took 2 weeks. It wasn't simple. There were moments when Heather thought it would fall apart, because the conditions Derek laid out in the first round heavily favored his side, and she wasn't the kind of person who accepted unbalanced terms in silence. They argued, really argued, voices raised in one of the meetings they had with Mr. Henderson acting as mediator. Derek was hard-headed. Heather was stubborn. Both of them knew exactly what they wanted, and neither was willing to come out on the losing end. But something started to shift in those meetings, not overnight. Little by little, the way things change when two people with similar stories spend enough time talking. Derek had started in the mechanic trade with his uncle in a small space that didn't even have a name. He learned through yelling and hands-on experience, no one teaching him with patience. He opened his shop at 28 with money he'd saved for years doing odd jobs. He knew what it meant to build something from scratch, and when he found out during one of the conversations that Heather had tried to keep her father's garage going for 2 years after he got sick, working another job during the day and opening the garage at night with the help of 2 employees, and that she still hadn't been able to make it work, he got quiet in a way different from his other silences. "2 years doing that alone?" he asked. 2 years and 3 months. He didn't say anything else that day. At the next meeting, his conditions were different, more balanced. Mr. Henderson noticed. Heather noticed. No one commented out loud. The contract was signed on a cold Wednesday afternoon in Mr. Henderson's office, with 4 hands on the pen at different moments. Derek would pay off the debt and put up the capital for renovation and re-equipment. Heather would contribute the appraised property and technical management of the operation. The split was 50-50, with a clause she had insisted on so much it became a heated point of argument. The place would keep her father's name. Walter's Garage. Derek thought it was a sentimental detail with no commercial value. Heather said that if that clause didn't go in, she would get up and the deal wouldn't happen. Mr. Henderson watched them both in silence, like a referee who preferred not to intervene. Derek gave in, not willingly, not with a smile, but he gave in. The renovation took 1.5 months. Heather was there every day, overseeing every step, choosing every detail. The new workbench was placed exactly where the old one had been. The photo of her and her father, in coveralls and holding a wrench, got a new frame and was hung on the wall next to the entrance. On opening day, Mr. Walter was brought by her in the car, the wheelchair he now used folded up in the back seat. He was 71 years old, his hair completely white and his hands trembled a little, but his eyes were the same as always. When she pushed him in front of the new sign, with his name in metal letters on the wall of the shop, he was silent for a while. She squeezed his shoulder. "I told you I wouldn't let it close, Dad." He didn't answer right away. Heather placed her hand over his, that big, calloused hand she had held so many times as a child while learning to tighten a bolt with just the right touch. "You never had to prove anything to me," he said, his voice rough, "but I'm glad you proved it to yourself." Derek was on the other side of the garage when that happened, pretending to talk to Joey about something or other, but he saw, and Mr. Arthur saw too, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, just like the day Heather had shown up with the broken car. Only this time the smile was different. It wasn't mockery. It was respect. In the weeks that followed, the garage started getting busier. The neighborhood was good. The locals remembered Mr. Walter's name from years back, and the quality of the work Heather demanded was exactly what he had taught her. Meticulous, honest, no shortcuts. No service beyond what was needed. No made-up diagnosis to charge more. Joey, who had come to work at the new location as part of the deal, was the first to admit, one afternoon when the two of them were eating lunch on the workbench, that he had been surprised the day she showed up with the car. "You know we were all laughing, right?" "I know perfectly well," she said without any anger. "That was ugly of us." "Yeah, it was. And you never threw it in our faces afterward." Heather set her lunchbox on the bench and looked at him with that calm she was known for. "Throwing it in your faces wouldn't have done any good. It would have just made me feel superior for 2 minutes and cost me a partnership I needed." Joey was quiet for a moment. "Did your dad teach you that?" "My dad taught me that the wrong tool ruins the bolt, in everything in life." I don't know why, but that sentence stuck with everyone who was nearby that afternoon. Months later, when the garage was already well established and Derek had started spending more time there than at the original location, he said something to Heather that she didn't expect. "You remember what I said that day? That if it were the censor, you'd quit." "Yeah, I remember." "Well," he paused. "Good thing I didn't follow through." She looked at him with a seriousness that lasted about 2 seconds. Then she let out a laugh. A real laugh, the kind that rises from your chest and escapes without warning. And Derek, for the first time since she had known him, laughed along. At himself. Which is the hardest kind of laugh there is. Heather leaned against her father's workbench, looked at the photo of the two of them on the wall, that kid in blue overalls holding a wrench, and thought her father would have liked this. Not the victory, not the opening, not the name on the sign. But this moment. 2 mechanics, from different stories, laughing on the same side of the bench. End of story. This story stays with me in a way that's hard to explain, because deep down, it's not about cars. It's about what we carry, about what's worth holding on to when the whole world wants you to let go. It's about that father or that mother who planted something in you that no one can take away. Tell us, do you know someone like that? Someone who faced a moment like that and didn't give up what truly mattered? Leave it in the comments and also tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious to know. If this story moved you, hit like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. We've got plenty more good stories to tell.